A pleasant good day, people, and we are live. All right, so welcome to the Reverb Part 3, Rights of Performers and Producers. I trust that you have your notebooks at hand. So let's get right into it. All right, so the key topics we're going to cover today, we're going to do what my colleague Kavish did in part 1, just a quick overview of intellectual property rights. We will find out what are related rights and who are protected under related rights, the local laws and international treaties that apply to performers and producers, and the overall definition of performers and different types of performers in song recordings. I will definitely deal with the different types of producers, creative versus executive, and duration of rights of performers and producers, the exclusive rights of performers and producers, and a term known as equitable remuneration for performers and producers, an overview of licenses, my contact information, and that's all for today. So, a quick overview of intellectual property rights. So, when we hear the word intellectual property, it refers to the expressed creations of the human mind. But intellectual property is very wide in scope. And it's broken down into two branches: industrial property, and the other branch is copyright and related rights. So simply put, when we hear things like patents and trademarks, industrial designs, that refer to industrial property. The other branch is copyright and related rights. And simply put, we must understand that there are key items and individuals that are protected under copyright and related rights. And what we'll be doing today is to find out who are the individuals that are protected under related rights. Right, so what are related rights? Related rights are exclusive rights that protect the legal interests of three specific individuals and entities. And this is according to the World Intellectual Property Organization, WIPO. And the first set of individuals that are protected under related rights are performers. And later on, we'll go into a breakdown of who are performers. The important thing is there are performances that are connected with the performers. The second set of individuals are the producers of song recordings, and they refer to the protection of song recordings. And then we have broadcast entities, which refer to broadcasts. So these are the individuals and entities that are specifically protected under related rights. What do? They lend their assistance to authors of copyright works in the communication of such works. So it's very important to understand that there's a relationship between copyright and related rights. So for example, let's understand that relationship. The author, who is known as a songwriter, would write lyrics or compose a melody, and that is known as a musical work. And that is protected under copyright. Simply put, people, a musical work cannot perform itself. And this is where we need the assistance of another type of creative to help communicate that work to an audience. And this is where the performer comes in. In this case, a performer who is a singer. And by him or her interpreting that musical work and putting their own creative style what we would get is a performance. That performance is what is protected under related rights. That performance, very impactful to say, is not covered under copyright, but covered under related rights. Excuse me, take a sip of water. Now, another name for related rights is neighboring rights. Two entirely different words or terms with the same meaning. And how are related rights or neighboring rights governed in TNT? This is an excerpt of our Copyright Act. We are guided by the Copyright Act of Trinidad and Tobago, Chapter 8280. Part 5 is known as neighboring rights. And what does that do? The protection of performers, producers of song recordings, and broadcasting organizations. I'm going to make the link again. Performers is with reference to performances. Producers of song recordings is with reference to song recordings. And broadcasting organizations with reference to broadcast. So we always make that link with the individuals that are protected and what is being protected. Any Copyright Act or national laws are further supported or strengthened by what are known as international treaties. My colleague Heather and Kavish may have covered that once we are speaking about authors of literary and artistic works, there's a specific treaty that applies to them, and that is known as the Berne Convention. However, for performers and producers, they have their own type of independent conventions. So these are treaties that refer to related rights. And the first one was the Rome Convention that was created in 1961. The Rome Convention was specifically for the protection of performers, producers of phonograms. Now, phonograms in this case means song recordings, and broadcasting organizations. There was another treaty that was updated in 1996, and that is known as the WIPO Performances and Phonograms Treaty, or short, the WPPT. This treaty is very important for the protection of performers and producers of phonograms in the digital internet age. That's very important for understanding the paradigm shift the music industry made from traditional to online. And when we hear terms like streaming, downloads, ISRC codes, metadata, this is the treaty that supports those activities. And when we go further into the presentation, we will make further links. One of the last treaties that apply to related rights is the Beijing Treaty for Audiovisual Performances. And this was created in 2012. This treaty is for the protection of performers in audiovisual performances. This says that performers whose works are embodied in audiovisual performances or audiovisual platforms, this treaty has a set of guidelines, prerequisites. How are they protected in the digital era or the traditional sense? So these treaties, all of the above, are for the protection of performers and producers in some kind of way. And fortunately, I can speak for the last two. Trinidad and Tobago is a signatory to the WIPO Performances and Phonograms Treaty, WPPT, and we have just signed the Beijing Treaty of Audiovisual Performances. How do we define performers? The Rome Convention in 1961 and the Beijing Treaty and the WPPT actually gives the definition of performers. Performers means actors, singers, musicians, dancers, and other persons who act sing, deliver, declaim, play in, or otherwise perform literary or artistic works. This is very wide. And what's very important is what we are speaking about here is a different category of creatives who operate within the entertainment industry. Singers, musicians, dancers. And what it says is that they are not covered under copyright. They are covered under related rights. And these treaties are the treaties that define performers in a very wide sense. The WPPT and Beijing Treaty made an addition. So while you have the actors, singers, musicians, dancers, and other persons who act, sing, deliver, declaim, play in, interpret, or otherwise perform literary or artistic works, what they added was expressions of folklore. Expressions of folklore is very important to our context in Trinidad and Tobago. They refer to our carnival characters such as our Jamolasi, Midnight Robber, Fancy Sailor. They are all performances. And what it says is that they are also not necessarily covered under copyright, but covered under related rights. So this is how wide related rights protect different types of performance. So let's get to performers in sound recordings. We have 4 categories of performers here. Lead vocals performer, a lead musician performer, the background vocalist performer, and the session musician performer, each playing a specific role in a song recording. Now, not because that you are seeing a vocalist who is a singer, this does not dispute the fact that if you do rap, or you chant, or you do spoken word, that this does not apply to you. It applies to any type of lead vocalist or lead performer. So you are protected under related rights. Same with a lead musician. A lead musician could be a steel pan player, a saxophonist, a violinist, whatever instrument you play that is that lead instrument, you are also protected under related rights. Background vocalists and session musicians in a studio environment are often brought in. Now, not in a literary sense, but a figuratively sense, that they add flavor and color and enhance recordings. And they are used in a studio session. An important thing to understand is they too are also covered under related rights. Let's talk about the producer, the creative producer versus the executive producer. Now, what's important? The music business has its own jargon, and intellectual property rights also has its own jargon. As far as the music industry is concerned, there are different types of producers. Let us make a breakdown here. We have the creative producer and we have the executive producer. Before you look at the definition, I want you to pay attention to the picture. What we are seeing is an individual who is directing a vocalist in a music studio. That's very important. The creative producer is likened to someone like a movie director. He is the one who tells the singer, go. I'm not satisfied. You could do better than that. He is directing the singer. He's also responsible for directing the slide, the previous slide, where I said background vocalists and session musicians. The role of the producer is to also direct every contributor when it comes to the overall sound of that recording. So now we can understand the definition. The creative producer is one who has artistic control and is responsible for quality, performance, and the overall sound of the sound recording. That is very important to the role of a creative producer. The executive producer Simple definition. For all intents and purposes, this is someone who is responsible for financing that recording process. So the executive producer is an individual who is a top financer of a music production and who has administrative control of a project. The word administrative control is very important here. Number one, an executive producer can be anyone. He can be a school teacher. He can be a bank manager. The important thing is he is an investor, the one who is responsible for covering the cost of a production. So he is responsible for covering the cost of the lead vocalist. He would pay your background vocalist. He would pay your session musicians, or even pay the producer, the creative producer. The important thing is, when income comes in from that song recording, the executive producer also has the responsibility to cover the cost or give royalties to the lead vocalist, the lead musician, or if the producer has a share in those royalties. This is how a music business is structured. That's the model, that the executive producer is responsible for covering the cost in the front end and the back end. So if we would summarize, right, I can anticipate your questions coming after with this, but if we would summarize the differences in these two individuals, we can say that the creative producer is responsible for creative arrangements, where the executive producer is responsible for financial arrangements. Excuse me for a sip of water. Okay. So I've been speaking about song recordings. Let us understand how a song recording is structured. So components of a song recording, but very important in Trinidad and Tobago. Don't read anything yet. When we identify a song recording has various contributions or contributors. Each contributor is recognized as individual or independent of each other. We could recognize the contribution of the author of the musical work, that's the songwriter, and his contribution is protected under copyright. The other contribution we would recognize is the contribution of the performers, your lead vocalists, your background vocalists, your musicians. And they would fit within this category of performances within that song recording. And then a producer who puts everything together. Now look at the category of protection for the performers. They are protected under neighboring rights, and the producer of the song recording is protected under neighboring rights. It is very important for me to say that according to WIPO, World Intellectual Property Organization, authors of musical works, they will always be covered and protected under copyright. Performers, any part of the world, they will also be protected under related rights or neighboring rights. All depends on which term they are using. However, the song recording, according to the territory you're in. So for example, the UK, the US, Canada, even Jamaica, they have decided to protect their song recordings under copyright. That's very important to understand. The cross-border and different territories that have chosen to protect their song recordings under a different category of intellectual property. But nevertheless, the definition of a song recording is usually the same. The recorded performance of a musical work, including the creative contribution of the performer and directed by a producer. My colleague Heather and Kavish, your ears, both your ears probably ringing. I know you would have covered duration of rights. It means that copyright, intellectual property rights, they do have an expiry date. I put musical work here to make that reference again. So once you are a songwriter, you write lyrics, you compose melodies, the expiry date for your musical work will last your entire lifetime and 50 years after death. However, the performance or the performer and the song recording are not given that length of time. You are given a flat 50 calendar years. So the expiry date of a performance is 50 years from the date the performance was first recorded. Now, there's a formula. Don't worry that 50 years from now, you can't remember if you did the recording in June or April or September. There's a formula that it will be calculated at the end of the calendar year, of the year you recorded. Song recording has an option. The 50 years could be calculated from the date the song recording was released or recorded. I want to say this. There is a discussion or an argument about Calypso and its transition into soca. I think there's a timeline where soca really began somewhere in the 1970s. All those recordings in the 70s, pay particular attention, people. 1970 to 2020 is actually 50 years. So we are actually speaking about a lot of song recordings from Trinidad and Tobago that would have gone into the public domain. And that's very important. That's a very important conversation that we must have. Okay, excuse me again. So we're speaking about the exclusive rights. So performers are granted a bundle of exclusive rights. Those exclusive rights are further branched into economic rights and moral rights. The economic rights, as tacky as it may look, I put it in gold. 1 to 7 to even 8 economic rights. These rights actually are there to assist you in your financial earnings. Every one of these items here. Then we have the moral rights. I'll come back to economic rights. Moral rights are not concerned with financial gain, but they speak specifically to 2 concepts: the right of attribution and the right of integrity. The right of attribution, just like the author who has a right to be identified as the songwriter, your bragging right, the performer is also granted that right to claim to be identified as the performer in the performance. This is very important to understand performance. But you have a right to be identified as the performer. The right of integrity goes a little deeper. And the definition here is the performer has a right to object to specific uses of his performance that may be harmful to his reputation. Very, very strong words here. Sometimes it's best to give an example. So for example, a performer who is a vegetarian, or in this case, a vegan, who does not subscribe to any type of consumption of meat. Could you imagine if your recording was actually used in a commercial where your recording was promoting some sort of chicken product, fried chicken? The thing about it is you are a vegan. Your friends know you are a vegan. Your family knows you are a vegan. The question will ask, what's going on with you, partners? This is a violation of your integrity. And intellectual property now provides the opportunity for you to take action against any individual or entity that would have violated your integrity. That's the importance of intellectual property rights. Coming back to economic rights, let me give an example again. Performers, your live performance or your recorded performance is one of your most valuable assets. That's very important to understand. One of your most valuable assets. You have to protect it. An intellectual property right give you a set of guidelines to protect your valuable asset. I want to paint a scenario. You are hired by a promoter to perform at a particular space, date, and time. You would have negotiated an appearance fee. For anyone to receive that live performance would also have to be in the same space at that date and that time. I would have to even pay to see that live performance. This is what applies here. That live performance in that space, what you are being paid for, is limited to that space. Any promoter or any entity who wishes to record that performance or have that performance broadcasted to an audience at home through television or communicated to the public, meaning the internet streams. These are three separate activities from a live performance that you have the right to authorize that or prohibit that. In this scenario, it means that if a promoter wants to record your live performance, whether it's a video recording or an audio recording, then you have to renegotiate that cost. If they want to broadcast your live performance at home, to a home audience, then you have to renegotiate that cost. And of course, streaming. Because streaming could be anywhere. The internet has no boundaries. Your live performance could be streaming as far as Greenland or Sweden or even China. The question is, you cannot allow anyone, any entity to benefit from your valuable asset without you receiving anything from it. I know you're going to have some questions on this. I'm not going to go through every economic right here. And a matter of fact, in the other slide, I will deal with the right of making available and equitable remuneration. So the producers, they're also granted exclusive rights. Now, if you notice a pattern, producers are not granted moral rights. Maybe that's a work in progress. But they are granted a bundle of exclusive rights. The right of reproduction, adaptation, importation, rental, distribution. I will deal with reproduction and adaptation, making available and equitable remuneration. But this is very important to producers and your earning potential. The right of reproduction has to do with anyone making copies of your song recordings, whether it's a copy in a traditional sense or a copy online. Authorization has to come from you, and you have to be compensated for it. The right of adaptation, very important to producers. In the world of sampling, and let's define a sample as when a producer lifts an excerpt from an existing recording and places it as is into a new recording. That is a sample. There's nothing wrong with it. However, permission has to be granted from the original person who owns that song recording. And that is the right of that. That is the right of adaptation. That producers who use samples, that you must get the consent from the original producers. The right of making available. I think I need a sip of water for this. The right of making available. Don't read this yet. It wouldn't make any sense. I have to give an example here. The right of making available has to do with internet use, streaming. Streaming is defined as, let's say, the transmission of content over the internet. Now, streaming has two components. There's interactive streaming and there's non-interactive streaming. Interactive streaming is occurs where the consumer has a choice as to what he or she wants to hear. And examples of that are Spotify, Deezer, Tidal, any platform that has a subscription service where you, the consumer, can manipulate a playlist. That is interactive streaming, also known as music on demand. The right of making available directly connects to this activity, both for performers and producers. That whenever your song recordings or the performances that you have contributed to in those song recordings are available on those streaming platforms, you are entitled to be compensated. Now we can read the right of making available in the context of the paragraph, which came from the WPPT. Remember that treaty? World Intellectual Property Organization, Performances and Phonograms Treaty. That treaty was constructed specifically for uses of content over the internet. So the right of making available is where song recordings are used by wire or wireless means in such a way that members of the public may access them from a place and at a time individually chosen by them. This is the meaning of music on demand, where you can make your own playlists. So understand in this presentation today, in the context of digital distribution, once your music is on Spotify, Deezer, or any interactive service, as a performer and as a producer, you are entitled to some sort of compensation. I trust that is happening. The right of equitable remuneration is another economic right granted to both performers and producers. Simply put, the right to be compensated for specific activities and income is shared between the performer and the producer. I will elaborate on the right of equitable remuneration in the other slide. Yes. So equitable remuneration is actually identified in the Copyright Act of Trinidad and Tobago, section 23. So you can check it yourself. And what it says is that it identifies performers and their recorded performances, and the producers of song recordings, who are the owners of song recordings, are entitled to be compensated for these activities. One of the activities is public performance. What is that? The public performance is when your song recordings are publicly performed, whether it's on the avenue, whether it's in a hotel, in a restaurant, at a concert. You are entitled to be compensated whenever your song recordings and your performances that are recorded within those song recordings are publicly performed. The other activity is broadcast. And we are talking about free-to-air radio. If there are 30-something radio stations in Trinidad and Tobago, whenever your song recordings are broadcast on any one of those radio stations, you are entitled to be compensated. And last, communication to the public. That term again that is linked with the internet. But this time, it is the opposite of interactive streaming. This is now referred to non-interactive streaming. So equitable remuneration is linked to non-interactive streaming. And what is a non-interactive streaming? Non-interactive streaming occurs where the consumer does not have a choice as to what he wants to hear. They just have to accept what is being transmitted to them. And examples of that are internet radio. In the US, we have Pandora. In Trinidad and Tobago, we have internet stations. We have DJs that go online and do entire sets where you cannot manipulate that playlist, but they are playing song recordings, they are playing performances that are within those recordings, and that is known as non-interactive streaming. And again, equitable remuneration provides the opportunity to be compensated in any non-interactive streaming service. Licenses. Now, this is just an overview. I think it is laudable that there are a lot of people within the music industry understand or they are aware of different types of licenses. The question is, what are they for? When are they supposed to be applied? The basic definition of a license is an agreement that grants authorization from the rights owner to a user to use protected content. I have a pet peeve. I think we are operating in an industry where a lot of agreements, they do not exist. And there is a group of professionals in our industry that are known as attorneys, entertainment attorneys. We need to engage them people. They are the ones who are qualified to construct agreements, licenses. I think I will do a shameful plug. We have a dynamic group of entertainment attorneys in Trinidad and Tobago. And in the top of my head, I would mention Miss Carla Paris, Miss Cindy Daniel, Miss Dion McNichol Stevensons, Miss Akila Phillip, and Tarita Kalu. I take the opportunity to mention these ladies, and it's very important to realize we have a dynamic group of women operating in a male-dominated industry. Ladies, you're quite welcome, by the way. We need to utilize our entertainment attorneys, and maybe we can have conversations with Creative TT and MusicTT to create a database of entertainment attorneys so that we would really get this right. Anyway, back to licenses. So the important thing is, let us stop thinking that we know what to do. And let us stop importing and copying and pasting various excerpts from different licenses all over the world because it looks good. That's a horror story, people. I'm telling you, it's a horror story. Leave that to the entertainment attorneys. The important thing to understand about licenses, and I think I'm coming to the end of my presentation actually. Yes, licenses, there's a category. I think throughout the day, whether it was Kavish or Heather, by now you will realize there's a distinction between the term copyright and what is protected under copyright, and related rights or neighboring rights, and what is specifically protected under neighboring rights. In terms of a license, there are terms: mechanical license, synchronization license, grand license. Yes, you can Google it. And as our colleague Kavish says, you don't know how to Google it. Google how to Google it. Hey, Kavish, I give you credit here. This is intellectual property. Anyway, the musical work, people, the musical work. See that guy writing lyrics and composing a melody at the same time? There are specific licenses that apply exclusively to the musical work. And they're your mechanical license, your synchronization license, and your grand license. However, when it comes to the sound recording, those licenses, none of those licenses apply to song recording. The song recording has its own specific license known as a master use license. Let me give an example. One of the main examples would be entities wanting to use existing music in a film production. The rights to use the musical work, the lyrics and melody in that film apply to the synchronization license. However, that musical content that you're using in that film is actually an entire recording. So you need to get the clearance from the producer of the song recording. And as I mentioned before, that is not applied to either one of these licenses. You get that from your master use license. So in a film, you need two licenses: the rights of the musical work in the synchronization license, and the right to use the song recording in the master use license. I think my colleague Dion McNichols Stevenson's would hear my mantra over and over and over again. The rights in the musical work and the rights in the song recording are not one and the same. They are administered as two separate and independent rights. I think I want to commend the Copyright Music Organization because I've seen a form known as, let's say, synchronization license clearance, meaning that if an entity wants to use a musical composition, that they can go to the Copyright Music Organization and get consent or the clearance on behalf of the songwriter. But on that form itself, clearly states, this does not cover the rights of the producer. This license is not a master use license. You have to get an additional license from the producer. And I commend COT for really representing a best practice business model. I think we come to the end of my presentation, where I believe I would have left some room for some questions. This is my contact information. Now, people, I'm telling you, I am an introverted introvert. If I had a choice not to be on social media, then I would not be on social media. But maybe today I am making an effort to really put some content out there. I want us to work together. So as we say in local parlance, let me link up. Let me link up and fix your business. I'm on email, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Facebook, I'm on Instagram, I'm on Twitter. It has been a pleasure.